Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Price, and thank you for being here today. And thank you very much for letting me share with you some of my favorite people in the whole world and how they can teach me to help them be as expressive and wonderfully communicative in their piano playing as we know they can be. This session is entitled Pathways to Expression for Students Who are Special Learners. And if you are as privileged as I am to spend some time with these folks, you know that they are wonderful teachers and that they can teach us how to be as meaningful, relevant, and productive in our teaching as possible, not just for them, but for ourselves and for our traditional neurotypical learners as well. So one of the questions that I often get in my workshops is, well, if you've got a student with autism who may not communicate, or they may not understand social behaviors, or they may perceive the world a little bit differently, is it possible for them to be expressive in their music making? And my answer is always a resounding yes, yes, yes. You know, less ability to express a thought doesn't mean less thoughts. Less ability to express an emotion doesn't mean less emotions. It's just the way we get there is a little bit different and requires some adaptations in pedagogy that I have learned from my students to help them become more expressive. And I really do see it that way. When a student with autism or another special need comes into my studio, I am the student and that student is the teacher. And I know I'm going to get a masterclass in pedagogy and learning how to make my teaching relevant, meaningful, and productive, not just for them, but for myself and for my traditional neurotypical students as well. So today we're going to talk about pathways to expression for students who are special learners. And before we dig into some examples of how to help these students navigate the expressive markings in the score, I'd just like to share with you 5 factors that sort of guide my thinking and that I find are very important in my communication process to my students. So the first one is correct body position. And I think this is true for every pianist. We all struggle with this on a daily basis. So for my students with autism or other special needs, they may not engage in traditional play. So they may have physical deficits, which mean they may not have the core strength to sit up straight all the time. Or they may not have enough upper body and arm strength to suspend their arms over the keyboard, or enough leg strength to actually play the pedals. So I have to be very careful in showing them in specific terms how to make those movements and also helping them gain that strength as well. So these are some of the first things that I work with a student. And the first one is proper bench height. Because if they aren't sitting at the proper height, that's going to close the door on a lot of other things that they'll need to do with their bodies to be expressive. So one of the first things that I'll do is build into their practice and learning process how to find the correct bench height. And I want them to learn how to do it. I don't want to be the person always doing it for them. Certainly I teach it, but they need to learn how to do it themselves and make it part of every time they sit down at the piano. So I want a proper bench height where I can sit up straight. That might take a cushion, it might take a book, it might take something else, a booster seat. But what I want is I want for my upper arm to be relaxed and be able to hang. And I want my forearm to be suspended slightly above the keyboard. Now, if this is suspended slightly above the keyboard, it means the wrist is in a good position. My hand and the bridge, the knuckles of my hand are in a good position, slightly above the keyboard, so that there is a plane of motion within which my fingers can actually move, and I can actually make gestures at the keyboard. Now, if it's too high, all my fingers can do is reach, and we get hyperextension and tension, and there's really nothing that we can do beyond a certain limited range of motion at the keyboard. If this is too low, our students will bang down on the keyboard, or the fingers will try and lift up, which means a lot more tension. But if everything is suspended, then they can move their fingers and actually make sounds at the keyboard and begin to move in gestures at the keyboard as well. So I always start with correct bench height, upper arm, forearm position. And if that's correct, then generally wrist, hand, and bridge position is there so our fingers can actually move. That's the first thing. All right, second factor is I need to teach the meaning of the words that I'm going to use to my students. Now, many of our students may be nonverbal. They may have intellectual delays, which mean that they may not have a large vocabulary and they may not understand a lot of the meanings of the words that we use. And as musicians, we have a specialized vocabulary, and we also use a lot of the words that they know from other situations in a different context. So here's an example of a way I can confuse a student. Let's take the key name B. Well, it can be a bee, and I just gave you an example of the confusion right there in my sentence. Or be can be an insect, it can be a verb to be, or it can be a key name. So I have to be very careful that I don't do what I just did and say, one example is to be a bee, or to have a bee be a bee. Uh, we can confuse our students in enormous ways right there. I'm already confusing myself. Another example is the word right. For our students, right can mean correct, or it can be a direction, or we in context, we assign it to a part of the body. So that is a right hand or the right side of the body. Uh, if you think about that word, it can also, in a different spelling, R-I-T-E, be a religious right. It can also be a right in the Bill of Rights, or spelled W-R-I-T-E. It can be something that they write down on a page. And so we have to make sure that they hear the word, they have time to comprehend the word, and that we are explaining what it means in our vocabulary as musicians, and also making sure they understand it in the context. And I can also confuse my students with this kind of language as well. If I say something like, we need to use your left hand. Well, can you try it again? You can use your left hand, right? And we wonder why they use their right hand instead of their left when right was the last thing they heard. And some of our students may have auditory processing issues as well. So I want to make sure that I'm getting joint attention with them, and that I clearly pronounce and enunciate words, and that I see from their body language or their facial expressions that they have heard the word, and that I give them time to actually comprehend it and understand it. So third factor here, correct vocabulary. Now for a student with autism, things like analogies and metaphors often don't work for them. And I'll give you an example of that. If I tell a traditional neurotypical student that, okay, in measure 9, 10, 11, and 12, I need for the phrase to grow there because it's a crescendo. Can you make that grow? They can say, okay, yeah, that needs to get bigger in sound. And then with some trial and error and modeling and coaching, they can learn to make some movements that will approximate that crescendo in the sound. And then we assume that they can understand that concept, memorize it, and then transfer it to another situation. But for my student with autism, if you think about that, the phrase needs to grow or the sound needs to grow, that's the most ridiculous thing I could have said. Because first of all, grass grows, okay? Animals grow, people grow. The sound doesn't grow. And if you have a particularly bright student, they could look at you and say, well, I think you're wrong because I know that every time I play a key on the piano, the hammer strikes a string, we have a sound, and then it decays or it gets more quiet. So it can't grow. And you're a bad teacher because you're asking me to do something that's impossible on the piano. And you know what? They're right. And we'll get into some examples of that later on. So I want to make sure that I'm using very specific and literal vocabulary with my students. So um, that's a challenge always. You know, we have to say what we mean and mean what we say. And that's not something we do real well all the time as human beings. And tone has a lot to do with it, tone of voice. And if you don't think tone of voice is important, then go home tonight or today or whenever and speak to your significant other and be unmindful of your tone of voice. See how much trouble you get in very quickly, regardless of the vocabulary that you use. Number 4, as I said before, many of my students have auditory processing issues. And also intellectual delays. And so I need to make sure that I give them time to hear, to understand, and to process, and to put into action. And if my student needs 2 minutes to think about something and put it into action, I'll give them 2 minutes. I would rather give them 20 minutes to think about it and have them be successful than get to 19 minutes and say, well, okay, we're going to move on to the next thing, or I just think we're going to stop for now. I want success, and I'll do whatever I need to do to help that student be successful. And then number 5, constant assurance and reassurance and celebration and validation. Because let's face it, being creative in music making and being expressive in music making is often new. It's very hard to conceptualize, and it's very hard to be consistent with for younger students and even advanced pianists as well. And so there are a lot of unknowns there, and those can cause anxiety. So I celebrate everything. I always let my student know I am there with you. I'm going to help you do this step by step, and we can do as many do-overs as you need to. And let's say they make an attempt at a skill and it's not so successful. I'm still going to celebrate it because they tried. And so I'm going to say, you know what? You were just fabulous. You just did the best try that's ever been done. Do you think we can try again and we can do it this way? And always make it a teaching moment and a learning moment for both of us. And I always celebrate, even if it's just playing one key on the piano and doing it with a good tone or having good body posture, whatever it might be, we always acknowledge it, validate it, and celebrate it because I can't be inside that student's body or their brain. And so I will never know, even how well I might know that student, I will never know how difficult it may have been for them to pull all of that together and do that skill at the piano. So we do lots of celebrating in my class, and we're happy for the most part all the time. Okay, so let's talk about some possibilities now and explain how we can do them in concise, literal, and specific language, particularly for a student with autism, but also for students with all special needs. And I would argue for students who are neurotypical traditional students as well. Perhaps they might need a little bit of this discussion to help them along the journey in their expressive music making. Okay, so our first possibility are dynamics. So one of the first things that I'll do with my student is not use the word loud. If they see the little F, the forte, in the music, I'll first want to explain, make sure they have joint attention on that forte, and say, okay, this is an Italian word, or it's a letter that in Italian means forte, and what it means is strong. Now I'm going to use that word specifically because with good body posture and good suspension above the keyboard, then I want them to say with that finger, when you play your finger number 2, I want you to do it in a very strong way. And so in their mind, that expressive word is something they need to do with their body to make that sound. Conversely, if it's piano, we want you to play that G again, but do it with a very gentle finger. And then all of a sudden, we can start stringing these constructs together and say, okay, in measures 1 and 2, I need for you to play with strong finger movements. And in measure 3 and 4, I need for you to play with gentle movements. And with a little bit of time and coaching, then they begin to understand that it's a body movement that results in a sound. And that's just very clear and precise and specific and literal language that doesn't require a lot of abstract layers and thinking for our students. Okay, our next possibility is balance. And this is hard for every pianist. And it's hard because of 2 things. The first is that when we see the score in a piece of music and we see a forte at the beginning of the score, we know as advanced pianists that the right hand needs perhaps to be forte and the left hand is going to be mezzo forte or mezzo piano. We automatically understand that or have been taught that. Now, a student with autism will look at the score and take it literally. They'll see that forte and everything needs to be loud and everything needs to be strong. So often what I'll do is cross out the dynamic markings and maybe write forte above the right hand and mezzo piano or mezzo forte below the left hand so they can literally see that there are 2 different indications in the music as we need to go. It eliminates a lot of confusion for them. Now, the other half of that equation is very difficult for a lot of our students, and they have to learn in balance that one hand needs to play more strongly with fingers and the other a little more gently on the fingers. So I'm sure you've all heard this before. All right, that's all of my fingers playing very strongly. But if I explain this process and the score of balance with one hand being strong and the other one being more gentle, then perhaps we can do that hands separately with good body posture, strong fingers, and then maybe more gently. And then with a little bit of coaching and time, perhaps our students can begin to feel that how I do balance is and it takes a little bit of time for some of them, but they're really learning balance then. And then it just takes a reminder now and then for them to remember that, yeah, everything just isn't loud or everything isn't just soft in the music. Next possibility, crescendo and decrescendo. Okay, so we already talked about grass grows and people grow and animals grow. So again, I'm going to teach them the Italian word and the symbol and say, okay, in very literal and specific terms. Of course, I wouldn't say I'm going to teach you something in very literal and specific terms. Just say, this is how we do this in the music. With your right hand, finger number one, I want you to play the first note very gently. Then the second note a little more strong. The next note a little stronger. The next one strong, and the last one strongest. And then they learn how to play every single note at a successively different dynamic level, and they can play a beautifully graded crescendo. It's just been done in step-by-step breakdown and specific and literal terms. And they know how to move their bodies to make a beautifully graded crescendo. And of course, decrescendo is exactly the opposite. Strongest finger movement, less, more gentle finger movement, more gentle finger movement, most gentle finger movement. And then they can play a beautifully graded crescendo or a beautifully graded decrescendo. It's just a little bit different way of thinking about it. We're using words that tell their bodies what to do to make those sounds happen, instead of a lot of abstract analogies and metaphors and imaginative thinking, which might be foreign to their process. Okay, our next possibility, staccato. Okay, so in traditional teaching, we might say, you know, when you play your staccato, I want it to sound like popcorn. Or pretend that you're touching a hot stove and pull your finger away. Well, first of all, you know, for a student with autism, popcorn is popcorn. You may disrupt their thinking and they may think, wow, popcorn, where is it? Can I have some? Or, you know, we're teaching children all the time, don't touch hot things. The stove is dangerous. So why would we tell someone who has a limited understanding of these abstract concepts to touch a stove when they shouldn't be doing it? So really all staccato means is just space between notes. Means we're going to play a key and then we're going to let go of it. So with your finger, can you touch a key, push it down, then let go? Touch a key, press it down, let go. And then they're playing staccato. Then it's just a question of, can you touch and let it go very quickly? Or can you touch it and let it go more slowly? And then we get beautiful gradations in the types of staccatos we might need in the music making. Again, it's just very literal vocabulary without a lot of imaginative constructs in words that tell their bodies exactly what to do to make this happen in sound. Next, legato. That's just a natural progression. Now, legato it's something that's really bizarre in piano playing because it's something we really can't do. Not like a singer or a wind player or a brass player or a violinist. Or, you know, the minute we touch a key, that sound is going to decay. And so it becomes a different process for our students with autism. So to have them do legato, I'll again explain it's an Italian word. And what it means is this. And here's how I would break down the process. What I want you to do with finger number one is touch a key, press it down, and then keep your finger down. Try to relax as much as possible while you're holding that down. Now keep that finger down. Now your next finger, number two, I want you to play a key and also the next key and also hold it down. Now do you have them both held down? Relax. Now take your thumb and let it up while you're holding the other finger. Very good. You just played a C and D legato. And then we'll do it again and again and again. And then maybe chain more of those events together. Play a key, hold it down. Play the next one, hold it down. Let go of the other one. Play the E, hold it down. Let go of the D. Play the F, hold it down. Let go of the E. And then they've learned in a very step-by-step process how to play legato, and we're building relaxation into the process as well. It's not really that the notes are connected. It's not that they're smooth and flowing. It's just different movements we make with the body that are broken down into a sequence. All right. I am sure you have all heard playing of two-note slurs like this. All right. So we're playing legato, but we don't want the hiccup on the end of the note. And I use that word with my students. I think it's very funny if I say, oh, you have hiccups on your notes. One, and they laugh, and we often write that in their music, no hiccups. So how are we going to break that down for our students who have autism into very literal, specific, and step-by-step process? So we're going to do the legato, but we're also going to make sure that they can do dynamics at the same time. So once we've done legato, I may go back to that C, D, 1, 2 process of holding a key down, playing the next one, letting go. But now I want to ask them if they can do different finger touches as well. So maybe the first one is strong, and then maybe the next one is more gentle. And then we let go. And then strong and more gentle. And then that way I didn't have good body posture, so you saw that this happened instead of. So that's typical. When we start to hook skills together, it may push one thing out of place and we have to bring it back together. And that's why patience and repetition is very important. And also with the perpetual positive smile and calm demeanor and encouragement and validation. So that's how we do two-note slurs. And then my students can do beautiful groupings of. They just understand it in a very step-by-step literal process. Okay, so our next possibility is a really, really tricky one because it is the Italian indication that means to slow down, Ritard. And the sound equivalent in English is a very ugly word that we should never use with a student who has any kind of disability because that equivalent is very demeaning, it's degrading, it's just horrible. And so often if I'm going to teach this concept, I will alert the parents to what I need to do and tell them that we are going to, what process we're going to go through. And I may often not just even say that word. I may just say RIT dot, which is how they'll see it in their music most of the time. Or I'll just spell it out and say RITARD is an Italian word. And then I give the correct pronunciation with the emphasis on the first note, retard or retard. And then make sure that my student understands that it's not a derogative term at all. And then that it just means to slow down. And what I want them to do to slow down is to use a process where we're going to use what I like to call directive words, again, to tell their fingers what to do to play the key. So if I'm going to slow down in the music, I want to start giving them counting words that are going to help them slow down. And these are directive words, which might be something like play, 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 hold, or quarter, quarter, half note pattern, play, 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 hold. But in the context of slowing down, I may go play, 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 hold, play, and hold, play, and hold it. So that these words help them slow down physically by telling their bodies exactly what to do. So an example of that would be play, 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 hold, play, and hold, play. Or you could say play, 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 hold, play, and hold. Or whatever you feel might be appropriate for that part of the music. And then for a cello rondo, it's just exactly the opposite. We're going to do play, hold, play, hold, play, 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 or some a string of words that are going to help our students make that work. So it might be something like play and hold, play and play and play, play, that will help them speed up. Fermata is our next possibility. Okay, for a fermata, okay, so it just means stop in the music and hold longer. But how long? So I usually want to give my students an exact representation of how long they need to hold that. So often I will explain to them, fermata is another Italian word. It just means we're going to hold this note longer than we normally would. And so when we get here, instead of 2 counts for the half note, I want you to hold it for 3 or 4. And I may even write in those numbers or play and hold it or something in the music so they get an idea of how to do that. And it might be something like, and hold it. And it may seem counterproductive or counterintuitive to the expressive uh, type of playing where we want it to seem natural, but it really does sound very natural if we space those things out in our counting. And then there's a beat relationship. So our students can actually do it in a very natural way, but we have to tell them specifically how to do it in counting and in directed words. Okay, pedal. This is a tough one, right? Because we use rhythmic pedaling and syncopated pedaling. And then if you add to that fine motor skill deficits or lack of body strength that we would typically expect from a student and lack of ability to coordinate, then it becomes even more of a minefield. And there are, again, 2 sides of this problem. Number one is the way it's written in the score. We almost always use syncopated pedal, but yet that pedal mark always seems to go up right at the note. And so it's very confusing for a student who will take the score very literally and they will do rhythmic pedaling right with the note. So often what I'll do is white out those pedal markings and write them in after the note, or have my student write them in after the note. And I've had students who have written them in throughout the entire piece before, just so they'll know where to pedal. That's just so they know very literally when to lift the foot. Okay, so sometimes our students have problems coordinating that movement or they don't have the strength, so they'll actually need to lift up their whole leg and then press down on the pedal to get it to work. Other times they may have to use more of their foot or a different position on their foot to have enough strength to press the pedal down. And so that's okay. I'll start working with rhythmic pedaling because it's a little easier for them to coordinate. And if they need to lift up their whole leg to press down on the keyboard, on the pedal, I'll let them do it because maybe that's the only way they can do it. And through a long process of building up that strength and then also coaching and telling them very specifically, now I want your foot to stay on top of the pedal. And can you keep the other half of your foot on the floor and press down with your leg muscles? And then we just keep working and working and working and working with it. Now, a lot of the vocabulary that we use with pedaling is really confusing for students as well. Lift up your pedal. Well, we don't do that, if you think about it. We don't put our foot underneath the pedal and lift it up. And actually, we can't. We'll break the instrument or we'll break our foot if we tried to do that. What we do is press it down and then we relax our foot and let the pedal come back up. So I like to talk about it in those specific terms. And when we're teaching syncopated pedaling, I'll go back to what they already know, which is how to play a key and hold it down, and then move their foot. So we might say, play the C, hold it down, or first, let's get our body posture correct. I'm always already forgetting my first commandment in the list of 5 factors. So let's get our body position correct. Can you push your foot down and keep it down? Keep that pedal down. Now, can you play a key? Now, can you let the pedal push your foot back up and then put it back down? Now, can you play another key? Can you let the pedal push your foot up and then your foot push it back down? And then we chain together that process. And that's how over a longer period of time they can learn to do syncopated pedal. Now that may take a long time. And if it takes 6 months, I'll do it for 6 months. And just when I think the student is not going to get it, I always have to remind myself, Scott, give them another week. Because without fail, if I think that student is at the end of being able to do a skill and I say, give it another week, every single time they have come through with flying colors and they just needed that extra week. So you got to have a lot of faith that our kids can do this. Okay, and lastly is tempo. Um, so our tempo markings are often descriptive words in the music, which may have no meaning for them, or they may not understand the relationship to a title, to a tempo, or even to a metronome marking. A metronome can be a piece of technology that is very distracting for our students, or they may not be able to coordinate their body movements along with the metronome, or it may cause auditory processing issues for them as well. So for tempo, I like to use a lot of my voice and a lot of teacher modeling. So we are going to play this speed. Play, 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 and play, and play, and to help them get a sense of tempo through their directive words, which tell their bodies what to do. Um, Sometimes our students with autism, they get a tempo set in their head, excuse me, and they're going to do that no matter what. So sometimes I'll just let them do that. Or sometimes if they have that tempo in their head, I might say, okay, now I know you want to do it this fast, but do you think we can do it slower today? And then I'm just gently insistent on that tempo, and they usually come around and they try it that way. So those are just some ways of approaching expressive issues in playing for our students who are special learners, and how to use literal, specific language and vocabulary and step-by-step instruction to help them achieve these things in their piano playing at the keyboard. And then they can follow all of the markings in the school and they can be wonderfully expressive. Um, so if anybody ever says, yeah, well, I don't think that kid with autism, I don't think he can be really expressive in his piano playing. Oh, yes, he can. And it just takes a little bit different journey than our neurotypical traditional students. And the answer is always in literal, specific vocabulary and in a step-by-step breakdown in the routine. So thank you for listening and watching, and I wish you success with your students, and thank you for the work that you do. You are heroes in my heart, and I thank you forever for keeping music study alive for your students and helping them achieve their goals. Thank you very much.